Chapter 17. Time, it is well known, sometimes flies like a bird, sometimes crawls like a worm. But man is wont to be particularly happy when he does not even notice whether it passes quickly or slowly. It was in that way Arkady and Bazarov spent a fortnight at Madame Odintsov's. The good order she had established in her house and in her life partly contributed to this result. She adhered strictly to this order herself and forced others to submit to it. Everything during the day was done at a fixed time. In the morning, precisely at 8 o'clock, all the party assembled for tea. From morning tea till lunchtime, everyone did what he pleased. The hostess herself was engaged with her steward. The estate was on the rent system. Her butler and her head housekeeper. Before dinner, the party met again for conversation or reading. The evening was devoted to walking, cards, and music. At 10:30, Anna Sergeyevna retired to her own room, gave her orders for the following day, and went to bed. Bazarov did not like this measured, somewhat ostentatious punctuality in daily life. Like moving along rails, he pronounced it to be. The footmen in livery, the decorous butlers, offended his democratic sentiments. He declared that if one went so far, one might as well dine in the English style at once, in tailcoats and white ties. He once spoke plainly upon the subject to Anna Sergeyevna. Her attitude was such that no one hesitated to speak his mind freely before her. She heard him out, and then her comment was, "From your point of view, you are right. And perhaps in that respect I am too much of a lady. But there's no living in the country without order. One would be devoured by ennui." And she continued to go her own way. Bazarov grumbled, but the very reason life was so easy for him and Arkady at Madame Odintsov's was that everything in the house moved on rails. For all that, a change had taken place in both the young men since the first days of their stay at Nikolskoye. Bazarov, in whom Anna Sergeyevna was obviously interested, though she seldom agreed with him, began to show signs of an unrest unprecedented in him. He was easily put out of temper and unwilling to talk. He looked irritated and couldn't sit still in one place, just as though he were possessed by some secret longing. While Arkady, who had made up his mind conclusively that he was in love with Madame Odintsov, had begun to yield to a gentle melancholy. This melancholy did not, however, prevent him from becoming friendly with Katya. It even impelled him to get into friendly, affectionate terms with her. She does not appreciate me? So be it. But here is a good creature who does not repulse me, he thought. And his heart again knew the sweetness of magnanimous emotions. Katya vaguely realized that he was seeking a sort of consolation in her company and did not deny him or herself the innocent pleasure of a half-shy, half-confidential friendship. They didn't talk to each other in Anna Sergeyevna's presence. Katya always shrank into herself under her sister's sharp eyes, while Arkady, as befits a man in love, could pay attention to nothing else when near the object of his passion. But he was happy with Katya alone. He was conscious that he did not possess the power to interest Madame Odintsov. He was shy and at a loss when he was left alone with her. And she did not know what to say to him. He was too young for her. With Katya, on the other hand, Arkady felt at home. He treated her condescendingly, encouraged her to express the impressions made on her by music, reading novels, verses, and other such trifles, without noticing or realizing that these trifles were what interested him too. Katya, on her side, didn't try to drive away melancholy. Arkady was at his ease with Katya, Madame Odintsov with Bazarov, and thus it usually came to pass that the two couples, after being a little while together, went off on their separate ways, especially during the walks. Katya adored nature, and Arkady loved it, though he didn't dare to acknowledge it. Madame Odintsov was, like Bazarov, rather indifferent to the beauties of nature. The almost continual separation of the two friends was not without its consequences. The relations between them began to change. Bazarov gave up talking to Arkady about Madame Odintsov. gave up even abusing her aristocratic ways. Katya, it's true, he praised as before, and only advised him to restrain her sentimental tendencies, but his praises were hurried, his advice dry, and in general he talked less to Arkady than before. He seemed to avoid him, seemed ill at ease with him. Arkady observed it all, but he kept his observations to himself. The real cause of all this newness was the feeling inspired in Bazarov by Madame Odintsov, a feeling which tortured and maddened him, and which he would at once have denied with scornful laughter and cynical abuse if anyone had ever so remotely hinted at the possibility of what was taking place in him. Bazarov had a great love for women and for feminine beauty, but love in the ideal, or as he expressed it, romantic sense, he called lunacy, unpardonable imbecility. He regarded chivalrous sentiments as something of the nature of deformity or disease, and had more than once expressed his wonder that Toggenburg and all the Minne singers and troubadours had not been put into a lunatic asylum. If a woman takes your fancy, he used to say, try and gain your end. But if you can't, well, turn your back on her. There are lots of good fish in the sea. Madame Odintsov had taken his fancy. The rumors about her, the freedom and independence of her ideas, her unmistakable liking for him, all seemed to be in his favor. But he soon saw that with her he would not gain his ends. And to turn his back on her he found, to his own bewilderment, beyond his power. His blood was on fire if he merely thought of her. He could easily have mastered his blood, but something else was taking root in him. Something he had never admitted, at which he had always jeered, at which all his pride revolted. In his conversations with Anna Sergeyevna, he expressed more strongly than ever his calm contempt for everything idealistic. But when he was alone, with indignation, he recognized idealism in himself. Then he would set off to the forest and walk with long strides about it, smashing the twigs that came in his way and cursing under his breath both her and himself. Or he would get into the hayloft in the barn and, obstinately closing his eyes, try to force himself to sleep, in which, of course, he did not always succeed. Suddenly, his imagination would bring before him those chaste hands twining one day about his neck, those proud lips responding to his kisses, those intellectual eyes dwelling with tenderness, yes, with tenderness, on his. And his head went round, and he forgot himself for an instant, till indignation boiled up in him again. He caught himself in all sorts of shameful thoughts, as though he were driven on by a devil mocking him. Sometimes he fancied that there was a change taking place in Madame Odintsov too, that there were signs in the expression of her face of something special, that perhaps... But at that point he would stamp or grind his teeth and clench his fists. Meanwhile, Bazarov was not altogether mistaken. He had struck Madame Odintsov's imagination. He interested her. She thought a great deal about him. In his absence, she was not bored. She was not impatient for his coming, but she always grew more lively on his appearance. She liked to be left alone with him. And she liked talking to him, even when he irritated her or offended her taste, her refined habits. She was, as it were, eager at once to sound him and to analyze herself. One day, walking in the garden with her, he suddenly announced in a surly voice that he intended going to his father's place very soon. She turned white, as though something had given her a pang, and such a pang that she wondered and pondered long after what could be the meaning of it. Bazarov had spoken of his departure with no idea of putting her to the test, of seeing what would come of it. He never fabricated. On the morning of that day, he had an interview with his father's steward, who had taken care of him when he was a child, Timofeyich. This Timofeyich, a little old man of much experience and astuteness, with faded yellow hair, a weather-beaten red face, and tiny teardrops in his shrunken eyes, unexpectedly appeared before Bazarov in his shortish overcoat of stout grayish-blue cloth, girt with a strip of leather and in tarred boots. "Hello, old man, how are you?" cried Bazarov.
"How do you do, Yevgeny Vasilievich?"
began the little old man, and he smiled with delight so that his whole face was all at once covered with wrinkles. "What have you come for? They sent for me, eh?"
"Upon my word, sir, how could we?"
mumbled Timofeyich. He remembered the strict injunctions he had received from his master on starting.
"We were sent to the town on business, and we'd heard news of your honor, so here we turned off on our way. That's to say, to have a look at your honor, as if we could think of disturbing you."
"Come, don't tell lies," Bazarov cut him short. "Is this the road to the town, do you mean to tell me?" Timofeyich hesitated and made no answer. "Is my father well?"
"Thank God, yes."
"And my mother?"
"Anna Vlasievna, too, glory be to God."
"They are expecting me, I suppose?" The little old man held his tiny head on one side.
"Ah, Yevgeny Vasilievich, it makes one's heart ache to see them. It does, really."
"Come, all right, shut up. Tell them I'm coming soon."
"Yes, sir,"
answered Timofeyich with a sigh. As he went out of the house, he pulled his cap down on his head with both hands, clambered into a wretched-looking racing droshky, and went off at a trot, but not in the direction of the town. On the evening of the same day, Madame Odintsov was sitting in her own room with Bazarov while Arkady walked up and down the hall listening to Katya's playing. The princess had gone upstairs to her own room. She couldn't bear guests, as a rule, and especially this new riffraff lot, as she called them. In the common rooms, she only sulked, but she made up for it in her own room by breaking out into such abuse before her maid that the cap danced on her head, wig and all. Madame Odintsov was well aware of all this. "How is it you are proposing to leave us?" she began. "How about your promise?" Bazarov started. "What promise? Have you forgotten? You meant to give me some lessons in chemistry." "It can't be helped. My father expects me. I can't loiter any longer. However, you can read Pelou's Ephrémy, Notions Générales de Chimie. It's a good book and clearly written. You'll find everything you need in it." "But do you remember? You assured me a book cannot take the place of..." "I've forgotten how you put it, but you know what I mean. Do you remember?" "It can't be helped," repeated Bazarov. "Why go away?" said Madame Odintsov, dropping her voice. He glanced at her. Her head had fallen onto the back of her easy-chair, and her arms, bare to the elbows, were folded on her bosom. She seemed paler in the light of the single lamp covered with a perforated paper shade. An ample white gown hid her completely in its soft folds. Even the tips of her feet, also crossed, were hardly seen. "And why stay?" answered Bazarov. Madame Odintsov turned her head slightly. "You ask why? Have you not enjoyed yourself with me? Or do you suppose you will not be missed here?" "I'm sure of it." Madame Odintsov was silent a minute. "You are wrong in thinking that. But I don't believe you. You could not say that seriously." Bazarov still sat immovable. "Yevgeny Vasilievich, why don't you speak?" "Why? What am I to say to you? People are not generally worth being missed, and I less than most." "Why so?" "I'm a practical, uninteresting person. I don't know how to talk." "You are fishing, Yevgeny Vasilievich. That's not a habit of mine. Don't you know yourself that I have nothing in common with the elegant side of life, the side you prize so much?" Madame Odintsov bit the corner of her handkerchief. "You may think what you like, but I shall be bored when you go away." "Arkady will remain," remarked Bazarov. Madame Odintsov shrugged her shoulders slightly. "I shall be bored," she repeated. "Really? In any case, you will not feel bored for long." "What makes you suppose that?" "Because you told me yourself that you are only bored when your regular routine is broken in upon. You've ordered your existence with such unimpeachable regularity that there can be no place in it for boredom or sadness, for any unpleasant emotions." And do you consider I am so unimpeachable? That's to say, that I have ordered my life with such regularity?
I should think so. Here's an example. In a few minutes, it'll strike 10, and I know beforehand that you will drive me away.
No. I'm not going to drive you away, Yevgeny Vasilyevich. You may stay. Open that window. I feel half stifled. Bazarov got up and gave a push to the window. It flew up with a loud crash. He hadn't expected it to open so easily. Besides, his hands were shaking. The soft, dark night looked into the room with its almost black sky, its faintly rustling trees, and the fresh fragrance of the pure open air. "Draw the blind and sit down," said Madame Odintsov. "I want to have a talk with you before you go away. Tell me something about yourself. You never talk about yourself."
I try to talk to you upon improving subjects, Anna Sergeyevna.
You are very modest, but I should like to know something about you, about your family, about your father, for whom you are forsaking us. Why is she talking like that? Thought Bazarov.
Oh, that's not in the least interesting, he uttered aloud, especially for you. We are obscure people.
And you regard me as an aristocrat? Bazarov lifted his eyes to Madame Odintsov. "Yes," he said, with exaggerated sharpness. She smiled. "I see you know me very little. Though you do maintain that all people are alike and it's not worthwhile to study them, I will tell you my life sometime or other, but first, you tell me yours." "I know you very little," repeated Bazarov. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps really everyone is a riddle. You, for instance, you avoid society. You are oppressed by it, and you have invited 2 students to stay with you. What makes you, with your intellect, with your beauty, live in the country?" What was it you said?" Madame Odintsov interposed eagerly. "With my beauty?" Bazarov scowled.
"Never mind that," he muttered. "I meant to say that I don't exactly understand why you have settled in the country."
"You don't understand it, but you explain it to yourself in some way?"
"Yes. I assume that you remain continually in the same place because you indulge yourself, because you are very fond of comfort and ease and very indifferent to everything else."
Madame Odintsov smiled again. "You would absolutely refuse to believe that I am capable of being carried away by anything?" Bazarov glanced at her from under his brows.
"By curiosity, perhaps, but not otherwise."
"Really? Well, now I understand why we are such friends. You are just like me, you see." "We are such friends," Bazarov articulated in a choked voice. "Yes. Why, I'd forgotten you wanted to go away." Bazarov got up. The lamp burnt dimly in the middle of the dark, luxurious, isolated room. From time to time, the blind was shaken, and there flowed in the freshness of the insidious night. There was heard its mysterious whisperings. Madame Odintsov sat perfectly still, but she was gradually possessed by concealed emotion. It communicated itself to Bazarov. He was suddenly conscious that he was alone with a young and lovely woman. "Where are you going?" she said slowly. He answered nothing and sank into a chair. "And so you consider me a placid, pampered, spoiled creature," she went on in the same voice, never taking her eyes off the window. "While I know so much about myself that I am unhappy."
"You unhappy? What for? Surely you can't attach any importance to idle gossip."
Madame Odintsov frowned. It annoyed her that he had given such a meaning to her words. "Such gossip does not affect me, Yevgeny Vasilyevich, and I am too proud to allow it to disturb me. I am unhappy because I have no desires. no passion for life. You look at me incredulously. You think that's said by an aristocrat who is all in lace and sitting in a velvet armchair. I don't conceal the fact. I love what you call comfort. And at the same time, I have little desire to live. Explain that contradiction as best you can. But all that's romanticism in your eyes. Bazarov shook his head. You're in good health, independent, rich. What more would you have? What do you want? What do I want? Echoed Madame Odintsov, and she sighed. I am very tired. I am old. I feel as if I have had a very long life. Yes, I am old, she added, softly drawing the ends of her lace over her bare arms. Her eyes met Bazarov's eyes, and she faintly blushed. Behind me, I have already so many memories. My life in Petersburg, wealth, then poverty, then my father's death, marriage, then the inevitable tour in due order. So many memories. And nothing to remember. And before me, a long, long road and no goal. I have no wish to go on.
Are you so disillusioned? Queried Bazarov.
No, but I am dissatisfied, Madame Odintsov replied, dwelling on each syllable. I think if I could interest myself strongly in something... You want to fall in love? Bazarov interrupted her. And you can't love. That's where your unhappiness lies. Madame Odintsov began to examine the sleeve of her lace. Is it true I can't love? She said. I should say not. Only I was wrong in calling that an unhappiness. On the contrary, anyone's more to be pitied when such a mischance befalls him. Mischance? What? Falling in love. And how do you come to know that? By hearsay, answered Bazarov angrily. You're flirting, he thought. You're bored and teasing me for want of something to do, while I... His heart really seemed as though it were being torn to pieces. Besides, you are perhaps too exacting, he said, bending his whole frame forward and playing with the fringe of the chair. Perhaps. My idea is everything or nothing. A life for a life. Take mine, give up thine. And that without regret or turning back. Or else better have nothing. Well, observed Bazarov, that's fair terms, and I'm surprised that so far you have not found what you wanted. And do you think it would be easy to give oneself up wholly to anything whatever? Not easy if you begin reflecting, waiting, and attaching value to yourself, prizing yourself, I mean. But to give oneself up without reflection is very easy. How can one help prizing oneself? If I am of no value, who could need my devotion? That's not my affair. That's the other's business to discover what is my value. The chief thing is to be able to devote oneself. Madame Odintsov bent forward from the back of her chair. You speak, she began, as though you had experienced all that. It happened to come up, Anna Sergeyevna. All that, as you know, is not in my line. But you could devote yourself? I don't know. I shouldn't like to boast. Madame Odintsov said nothing, and Bazarov was mute. The sounds of the piano floated up to them from the drawing room. How is it Katya is playing so late? Observed Madame Odintsov. Bazarov got up. Yes, it is really late now. It's time for you to go to bed. Wait a little. Why are you in a hurry? I want to say one word to you. What is it? Wait a little, whispered Madame Odintsov. Her eyes rested on Bazarov. It seemed as though she were examining him attentively. He walked across the room, then suddenly went up to her, hurriedly said goodbye, squeezed her hand so that she almost screamed, and was gone. She raised her crushed fingers to her lips, breathed on them, and suddenly, impulsively getting up from her low chair, she moved with rapid steps towards the door as though she wished to bring Bazarov back. A maid came into the room with a decanter on a silver tray. Madame Odintsov stood still, told her she could go, and sat down again, and again sank into thought. Her hair slipped loose and fell in a dark coil down her shoulders. Long after, the lamp was still burning in Anna Sergeyevna's room, and for long she stayed without moving, only from time to time chafing her hands, which ached a little from the cold of the night. Bazarov went back 2 hours later to his bedroom with his boots wet with dew, disheveled and ill-humored. He found Arkady at the writing table with a book in his hands, his coat buttoned up to the throat. "You're not in bed yet?" he said, in a tone, it seemed, of annoyance. "You stopped a long while with Anna Sergeyevna this evening," remarked Arkady, not answering him. "Yes, I stopped with her all the while you were playing the piano with Katya Sergeyevna." "I did not play," Arkady began, and he stopped. He felt the tears were coming into his eyes, and he did not like to cry before his sarcastic friend. Chapter 18. The following morning, when Madame Odintsov came down to morning tea, Bazarov sat a long while, bending over his cup. Then, suddenly, he glanced up at her. She turned to him as though he had struck her a blow, and he fancied that her face was a little paler since the night before. She quickly went off to her own room and didn't appear till lunch. It rained from early morning. There was no possibility of going for a walk. The whole company assembled in the drawing room. Arkady took up the new number of a journal and began reading it aloud. The princess, as was her habit, tried to express her amazement in her face as though he were doing something improper, then glared angrily at him. But he paid no attention to her. "Yevgeny Vasilyevich," said Anna Sergeyevna, "come to my room. I want to ask you. You mentioned a textbook yesterday." She got up and went to the door. The princess looked round with an expression that seemed to say, "Look at me, see how shocked I am," and again glared at Arkady. But he raised his voice, and exchanging glances with Katya, near whom he was sitting, he went on reading. Madame Odintsov went with rapid steps to her study. Bazarov followed her quickly, not raising his eyes, and only with his ears catching the delicate swish and rustle of her silk gown gliding before him. Madame Odintsov sank into the same easy chair in which she had sat the previous evening, and Bazarov took up the same position as before. "What was the name of that book?" she began after a brief silence. "Pelouse effrénée, Notion générale," answered Bazarov. "I might, though, recommend you also Gano, Traité élémentaire de physique expérimentale. In that book, the illustrations are clearer, and in general, it's a textbook." Madame Odintsov stretched out her hand. "Yevgeny Vasilyevich, I beg your pardon, but I didn't invite you in here to discuss textbooks. I wanted to continue our conversation of last night. You went away so suddenly. It will not bore you. I'm at your service, Anna Sergeyevna. But what were we talking about last night?" Madame Odintsov flung a sidelong glance at Bazarov. "We were talking of happiness, I believe. I told you about myself. By the way, I mentioned the word happiness. Tell me why it is that even when we are enjoying music, for instance, or a fine evening, or a conversation with sympathetic people, it all seems an intimation of some measureless happiness existing apart somewhere rather than actual happiness. Such, I mean, as we ourselves are in possession of. Why is it? Or perhaps you have no feeling like that. You know the saying, happiness is where we are not," replied Bazarov. "Besides, you told me yesterday you are discontented. I certainly never have such ideas come into my head." Perhaps they seem ridiculous to you? No, but they don't come into my head. Really? Do you know, I should very much like to know what you do think about. What? I don't understand. Listen, I have long wanted to speak openly to you. There's no need to tell you, you are conscious of it yourself, that you are not an ordinary man. You are still young, all life is before you. What are you preparing yourself for? What future is awaiting you? I mean to say, what object do you want to attain? What are you going forward to? What is in your heart? In short, who are you? What are you? You surprise me, Anna Sergeyevna. You're aware that I am studying natural science and Well, who are you? I have explained to you already that I'm going to be a district doctor. Anna Sergeyevna made a movement of impatience. What do you say that for? You don't believe it yourself. Arkady might answer me in that way, but not you. Why? In what is Arkady? Stop! Is it possible you could content yourself with such a humble career? And aren't you always maintaining yourself that you don't believe in medicine? You with your ambition, a district doctor. You answer me like that to put me off, because you have no confidence in me. But do you know, Evgeny Vasilievich, that I could understand you? I have been poor myself and ambitious like you. I have been perhaps through the same trials as you. That is all very well, Anna Sergeyevna, but you must pardon me, for I am not in the habit of talking freely about myself at any time, as a rule. And between you and me, there is such a gulf. What sort of gulf? You mean to tell me again that I am an aristocrat? No more of that, Evgeny Vasilievich. I thought I had proved to you. And even apart from that, broke in Bazarov, what could induce one to talk and think about the future, which for the most part does not depend on us? If a chance turns up of doing something, so much the better. And if it doesn't turn up, at least one will be glad one didn't gossip idly about it beforehand. You call a friendly conversation idle gossip? Or perhaps you consider me as a woman unworthy of your confidence. I know you despise us all. I don't despise you, Anna Sergeyevna. And you know that. No, I don't know anything. But let us suppose so. I understand your disinclination to talk of your future career, but as to what is taking place within you now, taking place, repeated Bazarov, as though I were some sort of government or society. In any case, it is utterly uninteresting. And besides, can a man always speak of everything that takes place in him? Why, I don't see why you can't speak freely of everything you have in your heart. Can you? Asked Bazarov. Yes, answered Anna Sergeyevna after a brief hesitation. Bazarov bowed his head. You are more fortunate than I am. Anna Sergeyevna looked at him questioningly. As you please, she went on. But still, something tells me that we have not come together for nothing. That we shall be great friends. I am sure this, what should I say, constraint, reticence in you will vanish at last. So you have noticed reticence, as you expressed it, constraint? Yes. Bazarov got up and went to the window. And would you like to know the reason of this reticence? Would you like to know what is passing within me? Yes, repeated Madame Odintsov with a sort of dread she did not at the time understand. And you will not be angry? No. No? Bazarov was standing with his back to her. Let me tell you, then, that I love you like a fool, like a madman. There, you forced it out of me. Madame Odintsov held both her hands up before her. But Bazarov was leaning with his forehead pressed against the window pane. He breathed hard. His whole body was visibly trembling. But it was not the tremor of youthful timidity, not the sweet alarm of the first declaration that possessed him. It was passion struggling in him, strong and painful, passion not unlike hatred, and perhaps akin to it. Madame Odintsov felt both afraid and sorry for him. "Evgeny Vasilievich," she said, and there was the ring of unconscious tenderness in her voice. He turned quickly, flung a searching look on her, and snatching both her hands, he drew her suddenly to his breast. She did not at once free herself from his embrace, but an instant later she was standing far away in the corner. And looking from there at Bazarov, he rushed at her. "You have misunderstood me," she whispered hurriedly in alarm. It seemed if he had made another step, she would have screamed. Bazarov bit his lips and went out. Half an hour after, a maid gave Anna Sergeyevna a note from Bazarov. It consisted simply of one line. "Am I to go today, or can I stop till tomorrow?" "Why should you go? I did not understand you. You did not understand me," Anna Sergeyevna answered him. But to herself she thought, "I did not understand myself either." She didn't show herself till dinner time, and kept walking to and fro in her room, stopping sometimes at the window, sometimes at the looking glass, and slowly rubbing her handkerchief over her neck, on which she still seemed to feel a burning spot. She asked herself what had induced her to force, in Bazarov's words, his confidence, and whether she had suspected nothing. "I am to blame," she decided aloud, "but I could not have foreseen this." She fell to musing and blushed crimson, remembering Bazarov's almost animal face when he had rushed at her. "Or," she uttered suddenly aloud. Then she stopped short and shook back her curls. She caught sight of herself in the glass. Her head thrown back, with a mysterious smile on the half-closed, half-opened eyes and lips, told her, it seemed in a flash, something at which she herself was confused. "No," she made up her mind at last. "God knows what it would lead to. He couldn't be played with. Peace is anyway the best thing in the world." Her peace of mind was not shaken, but she felt gloomy, and even shed a few tears once, though she could not have said why, certainly not for the insult done her. She didn't feel insulted, she was more inclined to feel guilty. Under the influence of various vague emotions, the sense of life passing by, the desire of novelty, she had forced herself to go up to a certain point, forced herself to look behind herself, and had seen behind her not even an abyss, but what was empty or revolting. Chapter 19. Great as was Madame Odintsov's self-control, and superior as she was to every kind of prejudice, she felt awkward when she went into the dining room to dinner. The meal went off fairly successfully, however. Porfiry Platonovich made his appearance and told various anecdotes. He had just come back from the town. Among other things, he informed them that the governor had ordered his secretaries on special commissions to wear spurs, in case he might send them off anywhere, for greater speed on horseback. Arkady talked in an undertone to Katya and diplomatically attended to the princess's wants. Bazarov maintained a grim and obstinate silence. Madame Odintsov looked at him twice, not stealthily, but straight in the face, which was bilious and forbidding, with downcast eyes and contemptuous determination stamped on every feature, and thought, "No, no, no." After dinner, she went with the whole company into the garden, and seeing that Bazarov wanted to speak to her, she took a few steps to one side and stopped. He went up to her, but even then did not raise his eyes, and said hoarsely, "I have to apologize to you, Anna Sergeyevna. You must be in a fury with me. No, I'm not angry with you, Yevgeny Vassilievich, answered Madame Odintsov. But I am sorry. So much the worse. Anyway, I'm sufficiently punished. My position, you will certainly agree, is most foolish. You wrote to me, why go away? But I cannot stay and don't wish to. Tomorrow I shall be gone. Yevgeny Vassilievich, why am I going away? No, I didn't mean to say that. There's no recalling the past, Anna Sergeyevna. And this was bound to come about sooner or later. Consequently, I must go. I can only conceive of one condition upon which I could remain, but that condition will never be. Excuse my impertinence, but you don't love me, and you never will love me, I suppose. Bazarov's eyes glittered for an instant under their dark brows. Anna Sergeyevna did not answer him. I'm afraid of this man, flashed through her brain. Goodbye, then, said Bazarov, as though he guessed her thought, and he went back into the house. Anna Sergeyevna walked slowly after him, and calling Katya to her, she took her arm. She didn't leave her side till quite evening. She didn't play cards and was constantly laughing, which did not at all accord with her pale and perplexed face. Arkady was bewildered, and looked on at her as all young people look on, that's to say, he was constantly asking himself, what is the meaning of that? Bazarov shut himself up in his room. He came back to tea, however. Anna Sergeyevna longed to say some friendly word to him, but she didn't know how to address him. An unexpected incident relieved her from her embarrassment. A butler announced the arrival of Sitnikov. It is difficult to do justice in words to the strange figure cut by the young apostle of progress as he fluttered into the room. Though with his characteristic impudence, he had made up his mind to go into the country to visit a woman whom he hardly knew, who had never invited him, but with whom, according to information he had gathered, such talented and intimate friends were staying, he was nevertheless trembling to the marrow of his bones. And instead of bringing out the apologies and compliments he had learned by heart beforehand, he muttered some absurdity about Evdoksya Kukshin having sent him to inquire after Anna Sergeyevna's health, and Arkady Nikolaevitch's, too, having always spoken to him in the highest terms. At this point, he faltered, and lost his presence of mind so completely that he sat down on his own hat. However, since no one turned him out, and Anna Sergeyevna even presented him to her aunt and her sister, he soon recovered himself and began to chatter volubly. The introduction of the commonplace is often an advantage in life. It relieves overstrained tension, and sobers too self-confident or self-sacrificing emotions by recalling its close kinship with him. With Sitnikov's appearance, everything became somehow duller and simpler. They all even ate a more solid supper and retired to bed half an hour earlier than usual. I might now repeat to you, said Arkady as he lay down in bed to Bazarov, who was also undressing, what you once said to me. Why are you so melancholy? One would think you had fulfilled some sacred duty. For some time past, a sort of pretense of free and easy banter had sprung up between the two young men, which is always an unmistakable sign of secret displeasure or unexpressed suspicions. I'm going to my father's tomorrow, said Bazarov. Arkady raised himself and leaned on his elbow. He felt both surprised and, for some reason or other, pleased. Ah, he commented. And is that why you're sad? Bazarov yawned. You'll get old if you know too much. And Anna Sergeyevna? Persisted Arkady. What about Anna Sergeyevna? I mean, will she let you go? I'm not her paid man. Arkady grew thoughtful, while Bazarov lay down and turned with his face to the wall. Some minutes went by in silence. Yevgeny? Cried Arkady suddenly. Well, I will leave with you tomorrow, too. Bazarov made no answer. Only I will go home, continued Arkady. We'll go together as far as Khokhlovsky, and there you can get horses at Fedot's. I should be delighted to make the acquaintance of your people, but I'm afraid of being in their way and yours. You're coming to us again later, of course. I've left all my things with you, Bazarov said, without turning round. Why doesn't he ask me why I am going, and just as suddenly as he, thought Arkady. In reality, why am I going, and why is he going? He pursued his reflections. He could find no satisfactory answer to his own question, though his heart was filled with some bitter feeling. He felt it would be hard to part from this life to which he had grown so accustomed. But for him to remain alone would be rather odd. Something has passed between them, he reasoned to himself. What good would it be for me to hang on after he's gone? She's utterly sick of me. I'm losing the last that remained to me. He began to imagine Anna Sergeyevna to himself, then other features gradually eclipsed the lovely image of the young widow. I'm sorry to lose Katya, too, Arkady whispered to his pillow, on which a tear had already fallen. All at once he shook back his hair and said aloud, "What the devil made that fool of a Sitnikov turn up here?" Bazarov at first stirred a little in his bed, then he uttered the following rejoinder. "You're still a fool, my boy, I see. Sitnikovs are indispensable to us. Do you understand? I need dolts like him. It's not for the gods to bake bricks, in fact." Oh, Arkady thought to himself, and then in a flash all the fathomless depths of Bazarov's conceit dawned upon him. "Are you and I gods, then? At least you're a god. Am not I a dolt, then?" "Yes," repeated Bazarov. "You're still a fool." Madame Odintsov expressed no special surprise when Arkady told her the next day that he was going with Bazarov. She seemed tired and absorbed. Katya looked at him silently and seriously. The princess went so far as to cross herself under her shawl so that he couldn't help noticing it. Sitnikov, on the other hand, was completely disconcerted. He had only just come into lunch in a new and fashionable get-up, not on this occasion of a Slavophile cut. The evening before, he had astonished the man assigned to wait on him by the amount of linen he had brought with him. And now, all of a sudden, his comrades were deserting him. He took a few tiny steps, doubled back like a hunted hare at the edge of a copse, and abruptly, almost with dismay, almost with a wail, announced that he proposed going too. Madame Odintsov did not attempt to detain him. "I have a very comfortable carriage," added the luckless young man, turning to Arkady. "I can take you, while Yevgeny Vasilievich can take your coach, so it will be even more convenient." "But really, it's not at all in your way, and it's a long way to my place." "That's nothing. I've plenty of time. Besides, I have business in that direction." "Gin selling?" asked Arkady, rather too contemptuously. But Sitnikov was reduced to such desperation that he didn't even laugh as usual. "I assure you my carriage is exceedingly comfortable," he muttered, "and there will be room for all." "Don't wound Monsieur Sitnikov by a refusal," commented Anna Sergeyevna. Arkady glanced at her and bowed his head significantly. The visitors started off after lunch. As she said goodbye to Bazarov, Madame Odintsov held out her hand to him and said, "We shall meet again, shan't we?" "As you command," answered Bazarov. "In that case, we shall." Arkady was the first to descend the steps. He got into Sitnikov's carriage. The servant tucked him in respectfully, but he could have killed him happily or have burst into tears. Bazarov took his seat in the coach. When they reached Khokhlovsky, Arkady waited till Fedot, the keeper of the posting station, had put in the horses, and going up to the coach, he said with his old smile to Bazarov, "Yevgeny, take me with you. I want to come to you." "Get in," Bazarov brought out through his teeth. Sitnikov, who had been walking to and fro round the wheels of his carriage, whistling briskly, could only gape when he heard these words. While Arkady coolly pulled his luggage out of the carriage, took his seat beside Bazarov, and bowing politely to his former fellow traveler, he called, "Whip up!" The coach rolled away and was soon out of sight. Sitnikov, utterly confused, looked at his coachman, but the latter was flicking his whip about the tail of the off-horse. Then Sitnikov jumped into the carriage and, growling at two passing peasants, "Put on your caps, idiots!" he drove to the town, where he arrived very late, and where, next day, at Madame Kukshin's, he dealt very severely with two disgusting stuck-up churls. When he was seated in the coach by Bazarov, Arkady pressed his hand warmly, and for a long while he said nothing. It seemed as though Bazarov understood and appreciated both the pressure and the silence. He hadn't slept all the previous night, and hadn't smoked, and had eaten scarcely anything for several days. His profile, already thinner, stood out darkly and sharply under his cap, which was pulled down to his eyebrows. "Well, brother," he said at last, "give us a cigarette. But look, I say, is my tongue yellow?" "Yes, it is," answered Arkady. And the cigarette's tasteless. The machine's out of gear." "You look changed lately, certainly," observed Arkady. "It's nothing. We shall soon be all right. One thing's a bother. My mother's so tender-hearted. If you don't grow as round as a tub and eat 10 times a day, she's quite upset. My father's all right. He's known all sorts of ups and downs himself. No, I can't smoke," he added, and he flung the cigarette into the dust of the road. "Do you think it's 20 miles? asked Arkady. "Yes, but ask this sage here." He indicated the peasant sitting on the box, a laborer of Fyodot's. But the sage only answered, "Who's to know? Miles hereabout aren't measured," and went on swearing in an undertone at the shaft horse for kicking with her headpiece, that is, shaking with her head down. Yes, began Bazarov. "It's a lesson to you, my young friend. An instructive example. God knows what rot it is. Every man hangs on a thread. The abyss may open under his feet any minute, and yet he must go and invent all sorts of discomforts for himself and spoil his life." "What are you alluding to?" asked Arkady. "I'm not alluding to anything. I'm saying straight out that we've both behaved like fools. What's the use of talking about it? Still, I've noticed in hospital practice the man who's furious at his illness, he's sure to get over it." "I don't quite understand you," observed Arkady. "I should have thought you had nothing to complain of." "And since you don't quite understand me, I'll tell you this. To my mind, it's better to break stones on the high road than to let a woman have the mastery of even the end of one's little finger. That's all." Bazarov was on the point of uttering his favorite word, romanticism, but he checked himself and said, "Rubbish. You don't believe me now, but I tell you, you and I have been in feminine society, and very nice we found it. But to throw up society like that is for all the world like a dip in cold water on a hot day. A man hasn't time to attend to such trifles. A man ought not to be tame, says an excellent Spanish proverb. Now you, I suppose, my sage friend," he added, turning to the peasant sitting on the box, "you've a wife?" The peasant showed both the friends his dull, blear-eyed face. "A wife? Yes, every man has a wife." "Do you beat her?" "My wife? Everything happens sometimes. We don't beat her without good reason." "Excellent. Well, and does she beat you?" The peasant gave a tug at the reins. "That's a strange thing to say, sir. You like your joke." He was obviously offended. "You hear, Arkady Nikolaevich? But we have taken a beating. That's what comes of being educated people." Arkady gave a forced laugh, while Bazarov turned away, and didn't open his mouth again the whole journey. The 20 miles seemed to Arkady quite 40, But at last, on the slope of some rising ground, appeared the small hamlet where Bazarov's parents lived. Beside it, in a young birch copse, could be seen a small house with a thatched roof. Two peasants stood with their hats on at the first hut, abusing each other. "You're a great sow," said one, "and worse than a little sucking pig." "And your wife's a witch," retorted the other. From their unconstrained behavior, Bazarov remarked to Arkady, and the playfulness of their retorts, you can guess that my father's peasants are not too much oppressed. Why, there he is, himself, coming out on the steps of his house. I must have heard the bells. It's he. It's he. I know his figure. Yes, how gray he's grown, though. Poor chap. Chapter 20. Bazarov leaned out of the coach while Arkady thrust his head out behind his companion's back and caught sight on the steps of the little manor house of a tall, Finnish man with disheveled hair and a thin hawk nose, dressed in an old military coat not buttoned up. He was standing, his legs wide apart, smoking a long pipe and screwing up his eyes to keep the sun out of them. The horses stopped. "Arrived at last," said Bazarov's father, still going on smoking, though the pipe was fairly dancing up and down between his fingers. "Come, get out, let me hug you." He began embracing his son. Anyusha, was heard a trembling woman's voice. The door was flung open, and in the doorway was seen a plump, short little old woman in a white cap and a short striped jacket. She moaned, staggered, and would certainly have fallen had not Bazarov supported her. Her plump little hands were instantly twined round his neck, her head was pressed to his breast, and there was a complete hush. The only sound heard was her broken sobs. Old Bazarov breathed hard and screwed his eyes up more than ever. "There, that's enough, Arisha, give over," he said, exchanging a glance with Arkady, who remained motionless in the coach, while the peasant on the box even turned his head away. "That's not at all necessary. Please, give over." "Ah, Vasily Ivanovich," faltered the old woman. "For what ages, my dear one, my darling Anyusha?" And not unclasping her hands, she drew her wrinkled face, wet with tears and working with tenderness, a little away from Bazarov, and gazed at him with blissful and comic-looking eyes, and again fell on his neck. Well, to be sure, that's all in the nature of things," commented Vasily Ivanovich. "Only we'd better come indoors. Here's a visitor. Come with Yevgeny. You must excuse it," he added, turning to Arkady and scraping with his foot. "You understand, a woman's weakness, and, well, a mother's heart." His lips and eyebrows, too, were twitching, and his beard was quivering. But he was obviously trying to control himself and appear almost indifferent. "Let's come in, mother, really," said Bazarov, and he led the enfeebled old woman into the house. Putting her into a comfortable armchair, he once more hurriedly embraced his father and introduced Arkady to him. "Heartily glad to make your acquaintance," said Vasily Ivanovich. "But you mustn't expect great things. Everything here in my house is done in a plain way, on a military footing. Arina Vlasyevna, calm yourself, pray. What weakness! The gentleman, our guest, will think ill of you." "My dear sir," said the old lady through her tears, "your name and your father's I haven't the honor of knowing." "Arkady Nikolaevich," put in Vasily Ivanovich solemnly in a low voice. "You must excuse a silly old woman like me." The old woman blew her nose and, bending her head to right and to left, carefully wiped one eye after the other. "You must excuse me. You see, I thought I should die, that I should not live to see my darling." "Well, here we have lived to see him, madam," put in Vasily Ivanovich. "Tanyushka," he turned to a bare-legged little girl of 13 in a bright red cotton dress, who was timidly peeping in at the door. "Bring your mistress a glass of water, on a tray, do you hear? And you, gentlemen," he added with a kind of old-fashioned playfulness, "let me ask you into the study of a retired old veteran." "Just once more let me embrace you, Anyusha," moaned Arina Vlasyevna. Bazarov bent down to her. "Why, what a handsome fellow you have grown." "Well, I don't know about being handsome," remarked Vasily Ivanovich.
But he's a man, as the saying is, homme fait. And now I hope, Arina Vlasyevna, that having satisfied your maternal heart, you will turn your thoughts to satisfying the appetites of our dear guests, because, as you're aware, even nightingales can't be fed on fairy tales.
The old lady got up from her chair. This minute, Vasily Ivanovich. The table shall be laid. I will run myself to the kitchen and order the samovar to be brought in. Everything shall be ready, everything. Why, I have not seen him, not given him food or drink these 3 years. Is that nothing?
There, mind, good mother, bustle about. Don't put us to shame. While you, gentlemen, I beg you to follow me. Here's Timofeyich come to pay his respects to you, Yevgeny. He, too, I dare say, is delighted, the old dog. Eh, aren't you delighted, old dog? Be so good as to follow me.
And Vasily Ivanovich went bustling forward, scraping and flapping with his slippers trodden down at heel. His whole house consisted of 6 tiny rooms. One of them, the one to which he led our friends, was called the study. A thick-legged table, littered over with papers black with the accumulation of ancient dust as though they had been smoked, occupied all the space between the 2 windows. On the walls hung Turkish firearms, whips, a saber, 2 maps, some anatomical diagrams, a portrait of Hofland, a monogram woven in hair in a blackened frame, and a diploma under glass. A leather sofa, torn and worn into hollows in parts, was placed between 2 huge cupboards of birchwood. On the shelves, books, boxes, stuffed birds, jars, and vials were huddled together in confusion. In one corner stood a broken galvanic battery.
I warned you, my dear Arkady Nikolaevich, began Vasily Ivanovich, that we live, so to say, bivouacking.
There, stop that. What are you apologizing for? Bazarov interrupted. Kirsanov knows very well we're not Croesuses, and that you have no butler. Where are we going to put him? That's the question.
To be sure, Yevgeny, I have a capital room there in the little lodge. He will be very comfortable there.
Have you had a lodge put up then?
Why, where the bathhouse is, put in Timofeyich.
That is next to the bathroom, Vasily Ivanovich added hurriedly.
It's summer now. I will run over there at once and make arrangements. And you, Timofeyich, meanwhile bring in their things. You, Yevgeny, I shall of course offer my study. Suum cuique.
There you have him. A comical old chap and very good-natured, remarked Bazarov as soon as Vasily Ivanovich had gone. Just such a queer fish as yours, only in another way. He chatters too much. And your mother seems an awfully nice woman, observed Arkady.
Yes, there's no humbug about her. You'll see what a dinner she'll give us. They didn't expect you today, sir. They've not brought any beef,
observed Timofeyich, who was just dragging in Bazarov's box. We shall get on very well without beef. It's no use crying for the moon. Poverty, they say, is no vice. How many serfs has your father? Arkady asked suddenly. The estate's not his, but mother's. There are 15 serfs, if I remember.
22 in all,
Timofeyich added with an air of displeasure. The flapping of slippers was heard, and Vasily Ivanovich reappeared. In a few minutes your room will be ready to receive you, he cried triumphantly. Arkady Nikolaevich, I think that is right. And here is your attendant, he added, indicating a short-cropped boy who had come in with him in a blue, full-skirted coat with ragged elbows and a pair of boots which didn't belong to him. His name is Fyetka. Again, I repeat, even though my son tells me not to, you mustn't expect great things. He knows how to fill a pipe, though. You smoke, of course? I generally smoke cigars, answered Arkady. And you do very sensibly. I myself give the preference to cigars, but in these solitudes it is exceedingly difficult to obtain them. There, that's enough humble pie, Bazarov interrupted again. You'd much better sit here on the sofa and let us have a look at you. Vasily Ivanovich laughed and sat down. He was very like his son in face. Only his brow was lower and narrower, and his mouth rather wider. And he was forever restless, shrugging up his shoulder as though his coat cut him under the armpits, blinking, clearing his throat, and gesticulating with his fingers, while his son was distinguished by a kind of nonchalant immobility.
Humble pie?
repeated Vasily Ivanovich. "You must not imagine, Yevgeny, I want to appeal, so to speak, to our guests' sympathies by making out we live in such a wilderness. Quite the contrary. I maintain that for a thinking man, nothing is a wilderness. At least, I try as far as possible not to get rusty, so to speak, not to fall behind the age." Vasily Ivanovich drew out of his pocket a new yellow silk handkerchief, which he had had time to snatch up on the way to Arkady's room, and flourishing it in the air, he proceeded, "I am not now alluding to the fact that, for example, at the cost of sacrifices not inconsiderable for me, I have put my peasants on the rent system and given up my land to them on half profits. I regarded that as my duty. Common sense itself enjoins such a proceeding, though other proprietors do not even dream of it. I am alluding to the sciences, to culture." "Yes, I see you have here the Friend of Health for 1855, remarked Bazarov. "It's sent me by an old comrade out of friendship," Vasily Ivanovich made haste to answer. "But we have, for instance, some idea even of phrenology," he added, addressing himself principally, however, to Arkady, and pointing to a small plaster head on the cupboard, divided into numbered squares. "We are not unacquainted even with Schenlein and Rademacher." "Why, do people still believe in Rademacher in this province?" asked Bazarov. Vasily Ivanovich cleared his throat. "In this province? Of course, gentlemen, you know best. How could we keep pace with you? You are here to take our places. In my day, too, there was some sort of a humoralist school, Hoffman and Brown, too, with his vitalism. They seemed very ridiculous to us, but of course they, too, had been great men at one time or other. Someone new has taken the place of Rademacher with you. You bow down to him, but in another 20 years it will be his turn to be laughed at." "For your consolation, I will tell you," observed Bazarov, "that nowadays we laugh at medicine altogether, and don't bow down to anyone." "How's that?" "Why, you're going to be a doctor, aren't you?" "Yes, but the one fact doesn't prevent the other." Vasily Ivanovich poked his third finger into his pipe, where a little smoldering ash was still left. "Well, perhaps. I am not going to dispute. What am I, a retired army doctor? Voilà tout. Now fate has made me take to farming. I served in your grandfather's brigade." He addressed himself again to Arkady. Yes, I have seen many sights in my day, and I was thrown into all kinds of society, brought into contact with all sorts of people. I myself, the man you see before you now, have felt the pulse of Prince Wittgenstein and of Zhukovsky. They were in the Southern Army, in the 14th, you understand." And here Vasily Ivanovich pursed his mouth up significantly. Well, but my business was on one side. Stick to your lancet and let everything else go hang. Your grandfather was a very honorable man, a real soldier." "Confess now, he was rather a blockhead," remarked Bazarov lazily. Yevgeny, how can you use such an expression? Do consider... Of course, General Kirsanov was not one of the... "Come, drop him," broke in Bazarov. "I was pleased as I was driving along here to see your birch copse. It is shot up capitally." Vasily Ivanovich brightened up. "And you must see what a little garden I've got now. I planted every tree myself. I've fruit and raspberries and all kinds of medicinal herbs. However clever you young gentlemen may be, old Paracelsus spoke the holy truth. In herbis, verbis et lapidibus. I've retired from practice, you know, of course, but 2 or 3 times a week it will happen that I'm brought back to my old work. They come for advice. I can't drive them away. Sometimes the poor have recourse to me for help, and indeed there are no doctors here at all. There's one of the neighbors here, a retired major, only fancy, he doctors the people too. I asked the question, has he studied medicine? And they told me, no, he's not studied. He does it more from philanthropy. From philanthropy. What do you think of that? Fyodka, fill me a pipe, said Bazarov rudely. And there's another doctor here who just got to a patient. Vasily Ivanovich persisted in a kind of desperation. When the patient had gone ad patres, the servant didn't let the doctor speak. "You're no longer wanted," he told him. He hadn't expected this, got confused, and asked, "Why? Did your master hiccup before his death?" "Yes." "Did he hiccup much?" "Yes." "Ah, well, that's all right." And off he set, back again. The old man was alone in his laughter. Arkady forced a smile on his face. Bazarov simply stretched. The conversation went on in this way for about an hour. Arkady had time to go to his room, which turned out to be the anteroom attached to the bathroom, but was very snug and clean. At last, Tanyusha came in and announced that dinner was ready. Vasily Ivanovich was the first to get up. "Come, gentlemen, you must be magnanimous and pardon me if I've bored you. I dare say my good wife will give you more satisfaction." The dinner, though prepared in haste, turned out to be very good, even abundant. Only the wine was not quite up to the mark. It was almost black sherry, bought by Timofeyich in the town at a well-known merchant's, and had a faint coppery, resinous taste. And the flies were a great nuisance. On ordinary days, a serf boy used to keep driving them away with a large green branch. But on this occasion, Vasily Ivanovich had sent him away through dread of the criticism of the younger generation. Arina Vlasyevna had had time to dress. She had put on a high cap with silk ribbons and a pale blue flowered shawl. She broke down again directly she caught sight of her Anyusha. But her husband had no need to admonish her. She made haste to wipe away her tears herself, for fear of spotting her shawl. Only the young men ate anything. The master and mistress of the house had dined long ago. Fyetka waited at table, obviously encumbered by having boots on for the first time. He was assisted by a woman of a masculine cast of face and one eye by name Anfisushka, who performed the duties of housekeeper, poultry woman, and laundress. Vasily Ivanovich walked up and down during the whole of dinner, and with a perfectly happy, positively beatific countenance, talked about the serious anxiety he felt at Napoleon's policy and the intricacy of the Italian question. Arina Vlasyevna took no notice of Arkady. She did not press him to eat. Leaning her round face, to which the full cherry-colored lips and the little moles on the cheeks and over the eyebrows gave a very simple, good-natured expression, on her little closed fist, she did not take her eyes off her son, and kept constantly sighing. She was dying to know for how long he had come, but she was afraid to ask him. What if he says for 2 days, she thought, and her heart sank. After the roast, Vasily Ivanovich disappeared for an instant, and returned with an opened half-bottle of champagne. "Here," he cried, "though we do live in the wilds, we have something to make merry with on festive occasions." He filled 3 champagne glasses and a little wine glass, proposed the health of our inestimable guests, and at once tossed off his glass in military fashion, while he made Arina Vlasyevna drink her wine glass to the last drop. When the time came in due course for preserves, Arkady, who could not bear anything sweet, thought it his duty, however, to taste 4 different kinds which had been freshly made, all the more as Bazarov flatly refused them and began at once smoking a cigarette. Then tea came on the scene with cream, butter, and cracknels. Then Vasily Ivanovich took them all into the garden to admire the beauty of the evening. As they passed the garden seat, he whispered to Arkady, "At this spot, I love to meditate as I watch the sunset. It suits a recluse like me. And there, a little farther off, I have planted some of the trees beloved of Horace." "What trees?" asked Bazarov, overhearing. "Oh, acacias." Bazarov began to yawn. "I imagine it's time our travelers are in the arms of Morpheus," observed Vasily Ivanovich. "That is, it's time for bed," Bazarov put in. "That's a correct idea. It's time, certainly." As he said goodnight to his mother, he kissed her on the forehead while she embraced him, and stealthily behind his back, she gave him her blessing 3 times. Vasily Ivanovich conducted Arkady to his room and wished him as refreshing repose as I enjoyed at your happy years. And Arkady did, as a fact, sleep excellently in his bathhouse. There was a smell of mint in it, and 2 crickets behind the stove rivaled each other in their drowsy chirping. Vasily Ivanovich went from Arkady's room to his study, and perching on the sofa at his son's feet, he was looking forward to having a chat with him. But Bazarov at once sent him away, saying he was sleepy, and didn't fall asleep till morning. With wide-open eyes, he stared vindictively into the darkness. The memories of childhood had no power over him, and besides, he had not yet had time to get rid of the impression of his recent bitter emotions. Arina Vlasyevna first prayed to her heart's content, then she had a long conversation with Aunt Fisishka, who stood stock still before her mistress, and fixing her solitary eye upon her, communicated in a mysterious whisper all her observations and conjectures in regard to Yevgeny Vasilyevich. The old lady's head was giddy with happiness and wine and tobacco smoke. Her husband tried to talk to her, but with a wave of his hand gave it up in despair. Arina Vlasyevna was a genuine Russian gentlewoman of the olden times. She ought to have lived 2 centuries before, in the old Moscow days. She was very devout and emotional. She believed in fortune-telling, charms, dreams, and omens of every possible kind. She believed in the prophecies of crazy people, in house spirits, in wood spirits, in unlucky meetings, in the evil eye, in popular remedies. She ate specially prepared salt on Holy Thursday and believed that the end of the world was at hand. She believed that if on Easter Sunday the lights did not go out at Vespers, then there would be a good crop of buckwheat, and that a mushroom will not grow after it has been looked on by the eye of man. She believed that the devil likes to be where there is water, and that every Jew has a blood-stained patch on his breast. She was afraid of mice, of snakes, of frogs, of sparrows, of leeches, of thunder, of cold water, of drafts, of horses, of goats, of red-haired people, and black cats. And she regarded crickets and dogs as unclean beasts. She never ate veal, doves, crayfishes, cheese, asparagus, artichokes, hares, nor watermelons, because a cut watermelon suggested the head of John the Baptist. And of oysters, she couldn't speak without a shudder. She was fond of eating, and fasted rigidly. She slept 10 hours out of the 24, and never went to bed at all if Vasily Ivanovich had so much as a headache. She had never read a single book except Alexis or The Cottage in the Forest. She wrote 1 or at the most 2 letters in a year, but was great in housewifery, preserving and jam making, though with her own hands she never touched a thing, and was generally disinclined to move from her place. Arina Vlasyevna was very kind-hearted and in her way not at all stupid. She knew that the world is divided into masters whose duty it is to command, and simple folk whose duty it is to serve them. And so she felt no repugnance to servility and prostrations to the ground, but she treated those in subjection to her kindly and gently, never let a single beggar go away empty-handed, and never spoke ill of anyone, though she was fond of gossip. In her youth, she had been pretty, had played the clavichord and spoken French a little. But in the course of many years' wanderings with her husband, whom she had married against her will, she had grown stout and forgotten music and French. Her son she loved and feared unutterably. She had given up the management of the property to Vasily Ivanovich, and now did not interfere in anything. She used to groan, wave her handkerchief, and raise her eyebrows higher and higher with horror as soon as her old husband began to discuss the impending government reforms and his own plans. She was apprehensive and constantly expecting some great misfortune, and began to weep whenever she remembered anything sorrowful. Such women are not common nowadays. God knows whether we ought to rejoice.